Well, let me start by saying, wow. You know, I understand there is more people outside this room than inside this room. And I understand that they're watching us right now. So apologies for not having enough seats for you out there. Um, I also understand that we created a black market for the tickets for this show. So that's not intended.
Do we get a cut?
I do for sure. I do for sure.
You can be our spokesman.
So preparing for this show, you know, I've asked a lot of friends, colleagues, if they can help me with the questions. What I didn't know, that I got more than 1,000 questions. Unfortunately, the time today is not enough to go through this. So I apologize for those friends and colleagues, and we'll try to focus it to finish within the hour, unless we can go for longer. And I'm sure you guys don't mind. Frank, do you mind? I knew it. You know, trying to focus the subjects today so we can get the best out of this panel. I thought, what are the most interesting subjects that we can go through today? And the subject that came to mind is really four main subjects that I want to take the panel through today. The first one would be the creative process. How do these guys think of it? How do these guys go through it? And we'll try to focus in and try to get the best out of that. And then I want to move a bit to the history. And how do we link the work of these gentlemen to the history? And if you speak about history, you must also speak about the future, which is a subject we will cover. And we will end the panel by talking about social change and how much social change plays as part of these guys' work, vision, and imagination. So the first subject, the creative process. And if I might start with you, Frank, you have described the start of the creative process as a terrifying moment. Does it get any easier with time for you?
Hopefully it'll never get easier, because I think it's that insecurity, I call it a healthy insecurity, in facing what I think at the most ideal is like the white canvas. And how do you, I mean, after you understand the problem, you understand the culture, you understand the budget, you understand all of the salient issues that are going to make the building, you still have to do something with it. You make a move of some kind, you make a mark, you make a form, you make a choice. Informed by all of those things. But that moment is terrifying, and I love it. I really do.
We love it too, I'm sure. You know, in the same subject, John, if I also can pick your brain, you have more than once described a new project as an adventure. How do you start an adventure? How do you think of an adventure, and how do you deal with it?
First, I apologize because my English is a broken English and I cannot speak like these guys. So I ask for translation to use the perfect words. Je commence mes projets avec un intense désir d'aventure. Et en me disant bien une chose, c'est que l'aventure est souvent symbole de risque, mais que le plus souvent, en architecture, le pire risque, c'est de ne pas en prendre. Et je considère que l'aventure, c'est avant tout une question de désir. Je commence chaque chose avec un énorme désir. Et ce désir, il est lié à des rencontres. Pour qu'un projet se fasse, il faut qu'il y ait un papa et une maman, en fait. Bon, quelque chose comme ça. Il faut que cette osmose arrive à se faire, il faut arriver à se comprendre. Et il faut arriver à séduire l'autre. Et il faut essayer de proposer, il faut essayer d'inventer. Et c'est cette invention qui est une véritable aventure, parce qu'on ne sait pas où elle va nous mener, en fait. Et je crois qu'on a à chaque fois des situations différentes. En fait, cette aventure est liée à quoi? Elle est liée aux situations. C'est des situations que je ne connais pas. Je n'ai jamais rencontré 2 fois la même situation. C'est pour ça que j'aime ce métier. Et c'est pour ça que je ne ferai jamais 2 fois la même chose. Parce que ce ne sera jamais le même moment, de toute façon. Donc même au même endroit, avec les mêmes personnes, le même programme, je ferai encore autre chose. Donc, à chaque fois, il y a cette recherche d'une forme de danger, en fait. Mais de danger qui est celui d'une chose inexplorée, d'une chose qu'on n'a pas imaginée, en fait. Nous sommes dans l'inimaginé. Et cet inimaginé doit devenir, à un moment, réalité. Et il faut convaincre la personne que c'est exactement ce dont elle a besoin. Et que c'est exactement... Et en fait, on me demande souvent, mais comment tu as fait pour faire passer ce projet? C'est pas ça veut dire faire passer un projet. Je ne fais jamais passer un projet. C'est parce qu'effectivement, dans ce dialogue, on se dit que c'est la meilleure solution, qu'on arrive à faire des choses incroyables. Incroyables, mais croyables à partir du moment où elles sont construites, uniquement.
Wow. Well, the translation is good, so I imagine the original is better. You know, Lord Foster, just on the same subject of creativity, creative process, I know you grew up in the north part of England, which was a focal point for British industrial movement. How much does the industrial movement affect the creative process that you go through?
Well, you can't escape it. I mean, architecture is about making things. It's the art of making things. So it's locked into technology. It's a translation of engineering, but it has depth, dimension, it's about emotion, it's about raising the spirit, it goes beyond shelter. I think my colleagues are very eloquent on the whole creative process, and I was just thinking, whilst I was listening to them, that in any university, the architects are almost, by virtue of their culture, antisocial because they're so consumed by the process of design. And for me, and I'm sure for colleagues, you never stop designing. And in that sense, I find that I'm never satisfied. I always want to have another go. I remember reading that on one very famous museum, I think it was the Kimball Gallery, that in the end they stopped Lou Kahn going on the building site because he always wanted to redesign the building, even when it was under construction. And finally they said, you know, enough. And literally, he wasn't allowed on site. And the culture in a school of architecture, and in a sense, I think of our own practice as totally close in spirit to a school of architecture. I mean, it is like Yale, it's 24 hours and 7 days a week, and you are always redesigning up to the last possible moment. And I think Frank has a very good point. You have, at some point, you start that process. And even though we're in a digital world, in the end, it's an analog process. You may be using computers, but the statement, whether that starts with a sketch, starts with a model, weaves in and out of different, in the end, they're all tools. They're all tools for the creative process.
Very interesting. I read, Lord, that you spoke about the creative process is where the artist or the architect stops and then the building starts when the modification process starts. Do you, when you do this work, do you see that transition? Do you know that it happened?
I think it's a continuous process in the sense that the design is again, talking personally, it's strategic, but then it becomes tactical. In other words, it's a total process down to the smallest detail. And it has many layers. I think research is critical in that process. In the end, I guess it's if there was one word which permeates these different worlds, it's curiosity. It's a burning curiosity. You really want to understand what generates a design. If it's a building for culture, what is that culture? If it's for an organization, what makes that organization tick? And that goes all the way along, the materials that the building is going to be made of. You want to feel, you want to go to the factory, you want to meet the craftsman. And in that sense, it's all-consuming. You become completely absorbed in the process. And it's about so many different things. It's about so many different stories, if you like. It has a very strong social agenda. It's very much about history, and everything overlaps. It's impossible to compartmentalize. I mean, you talked about, we'll move on from the creative process to history, but you can't separate the two. And if you want to, as somebody once said, if you want to look far ahead in time, then you best start by looking far backwards. And if you look at the burning issue of sustainability, then what better place to start before a world of cheap energy? How did people live in the desert before they could press a switch, before there was cheap power, before the age of cheap energy? They had to transform a climate. They had to work with nature. Those lessons have been forgotten. They have to be rediscovered. So for me, it's absolutely fascinating in the sense that you cannot divide it up into convenient segments.
It's very interesting and actually timely to move to our second subject, which is history, as you alluded to. In this part of the world, being in a journey together can mean a lot more than just sharing the same time or the same space. In the desert, traveling together has always meant putting your destiny, hopes, dreams, and life into someone else's hand. How significant is the history and the geography of a place in shaping your creative journey of a project? John, want to take a go at this?
Oui. En fait, une architecture appartient à un moment et à un lieu. Et pour savoir ce qu'est ce lieu, on ne peut le savoir qu'en comparant avec d'autres et qu'en sachant ce qui se passe dans le lieu le plus large. Et ce que je cherche à chaque fois, c'est ce que j'appelle la pièce manquante du puzzle par rapport à cette indissociabilité qu'il y a entre le lieu et l'architecture. Et c'est là où intervient le temps, c'est que l'architecture va transformer pendant un moment, temporairement, un lieu. On ne sait pas si ce temporairement, ça va durer quelques années, quelques décennies, quelques siècles. Mais c'est temporaire. Et on sait que ce lieu va être transformé en profondeur, peut-être, par quelque chose qui va s'éroder, par quelque chose qui va prendre le temps. Et le voyage créatif, il part de là, il part de cette imagination-là. Il part aussi donc d'un autre voyage qui est sur place, celui-là, c'est celui d'un dialogue en profondeur avec ceux qui ont vécu ce lieu, avec ceux qui ont précédé aussi, même si on ne les connaît pas. Et il y a une sorte de relation à établir qui souvent se passe par le contraste, par l'affirmation d'un nouveau temps et par la révélation, comme ça, de ce qui précède, à la fois dans l'histoire qui est construite et dans la géographie, effectivement, parce que tout le projet se fait en fonction d'une lumière, par exemple, se fait en fonction d'une végétation, se fait en fonction d'un éphémère, de sensations complètement liées à l'instant. Et rien ne m'intéresse plus que de transformer un lieu pour longtemps, mais surtout que cette perception du temps qui passe se fasse par l'instant.
That's very impressive. We can go on and on here on history, especially when we talk about your building. And I know you use poetry as a way also to get the best out of history and a building. What is the role of poetry when you're looking at a history of building?
Un philosophe disait que la poésie était le seul moyen d'atteindre une métaphysique instantanée. Finalement, c'est ce qu'on cherche, toujours. C'est ce trouble, cette question par rapport au sens. Ce qu'on recherche toujours dans un projet, c'est le sens et la sensibilité. Ce qu'on recherche toujours, c'est l'appartenance au lieu, mais en étant conscient du fait qu'on ne construit pas un espace, mais dans un espace, on construit dans un lieu. Puisque l'idée traditionnelle voudrait qu'on construise un espace. J'ai toujours pensé qu'on construisait dans un espace-temps, mais dans un espace physique. Et que cet espace physique n'est modifié que temporairement, une fois encore. Donc c'est ce processus de transformation qui est sensible. C'est lui qui crée le trouble. Tout ce qui vient au monde pour ne rien troubler ne mérite ni égard ni patience, disait René Char, notre poète. Donc si on est ici, c'est bien pour troubler. Une architecture qui ne troublerait pas, qu'est-ce que ce serait? Ce qu'on rencontre trop souvent.
Frank, on the same subject of history, and especially those buildings that use titanium as part of buildings that last much longer than the time we live. Do you think of what legacy your buildings leave as you create them?
I try to get involved with the place and time and the people and the culture. I work very intuitively so that the relationships between the people, and I think we've experienced that with your team, is evolving together so that the project evolves with an interaction with this client and the people they brought to me. And I was hesitant because it was formidable to travel here. At the beginning, I thought it was going to be impossible. And once I came and fell in love with the region, but my friends here have done other work here. This is my first and only project in the region, so I became very personally involved with the team. I knew the art part because I've done museums and worked with artists. I grew up with artists, and I understood that culture, and I was trying to understand what it meant to build here, what were the priorities, what were the images, what were the issues, what were the language, what is the history, what is the culture, and now I feel I've only scratched the surface. I wish I knew more. I want to know more. As this goes forward, I'll spend more time here. The legacy, I'm 83, so I don't know. I'm worried about they're going to finish on time before so I can see it. I've been lucky that a lot of the buildings I have been made a difference in the cultures they're built, and I think this collaboration with the Emiratis has been very meaningful, and I hope it results in a legacy. I hope it does.
We hope so too, and I think I can't speak for the future generation who are not here, but the legacy we'll find out, I guess. You know, if I can ask the same question, Lord Foster, on history, but I'm looking at it from what is modern and what is traditional when it comes to the creative process, and are they always in contradiction or conflict? Are they constantly conflicting, or can they actually fit together?
I don't find a conflict because, and again, I think that in the use of language, traditional in some ways defies definition. What do I mean by that? If you talk about something as being traditional, it's very easy to forget that when it was created, it was modern. It was at the cutting edge of technology. If you go back in time, and again repeating myself somewhat, to an age before cheap energy, when if you were building in the desert, you learned through trial and error, and you would learn that you could be cool inside a very thick thermal wall if that wall was in shade, because it would radiate cool, especially in the cold nights. And you would understand about orientation. So these lessons were built up over time, and they're very important lessons now when energy is more scarce, and it's not an age of cheap energy. So the one thing you can be absolutely certain is you have to have higher performance. You have to be able to do more with less. And in a way, that's in a tradition. If you take your mobile phone out and you compare it with how you would communicate, say, 20, 30 years ago, and you see that process of higher performance with miniaturization and so on. So I'm somewhat suspicious of this idea that the traditional is a style. So modernity, in a sense, is a continuum, and the richness of the cities that we enjoy most have never necessarily been created in one period. They have layers of different imprints over time, the use of different materials. Again, I think one of the interesting challenges today in an age of greater globalization is how can you discover a sense of place? And I think in that sense, history and location is more than just the climate. It's the cultural dimension, the things you can't measure, the sense of place, the layers underneath, the invisible layers. And I think our experience here in terms of the experiment of Masdar, again, doing more with less. I mean, what is quite interesting is you go there, the lights are blazing, it's a very energy-intensive environment because it's a laboratory complex devoted to a whole series of experiments about renewable energy. what is quite interesting is it's developing more power than it's consuming. And in that sense, it's totally solar. And that's exciting. So I would agree with Frank. I think it's a great environment here. It's very progressive. There are lots of explorations, and in a sense, this evening is a celebration of that.
Very true, very true. But I still I want to challenge you on this, and I want to challenge the panelists. You know, when I'm thinking of this region, thinking traditions, we are not known for buildings. We're not known for physical assets. If you look at our history, it's beyond that. It's really the sentimental side of it. And I'm trying to link that to a physical moment in the creation. And really the challenge I see for you guys is much bigger when it comes to a region like this that is so deep in tradition, but in a different way. Just a general question.
Very, very different, very, very hard to put into words, right? And so I think my response to it is hard to put into words as well. Maybe it's because you guys can't put it into words. I think it's a very strong feeling of your history, and to experience it is very unique. I'm honored. But how to explain what it is or what it should look like? You're right. There aren't. You know, you have the ancient buildings, you have the religious buildings, but the rest of it is sort of feeling your way through. I guess for me, I've relied on the interaction with the client, with the people that I met with, and they're watching their reactions to my studies, because I made a lot of models, they looked at them, they said things, and it was like probing in the unknown as to where it would go. And I think it's ultimately a work in progress. It's not that precious that if when it's finished, something has to be changed eventually over time. I think that's normal out here, more than in Western countries.
Interesting. I think we should move to the next subject, the future. And I'll start with John. You know, in 1970, you've in your early text, you've wrote, you've said, architecture is not, the future of architecture is not architecture anymore. So if we assume the future of architecture is not architecture, what would be the future of architecture?
C'est une citation qui demande à être précisée. Le futur de l'architecture n'est plus architectural ou n'est pas architectural. Architecture, il y a une majuscule. Et à propos de tradition, il y a une phrase qui me revient. La modernité, c'est la tradition du futur. Ce qui veut dire que ce qui m'intéresse, en fait, dans l'histoire, c'est à chaque fois cette invention. Ce qu'on considère comme aujourd'hui le plus classique, c'est à chaque fois un pas. Ce que les gens qui défendent les vieilles pierres et l'histoire en général ne s'en souviennent pas. Et le futur de l'architecture n'est pas architectural, ça veut dire aussi que rien ne m'intéresse plus que quand on me dit c'est pas de l'architecture. C'est-à-dire qu'il y a une extension du champ de l'architecture. Et quand on commence à introduire la photographie, par exemple, dans l'architecture, on dit oh, fous-moi la paix avec ça, c'est pas de l'architecture. Mais quand ils ont commencé, eux, là, les petits hangars de M. Foster, là, au tout début, si légers, si parfaits, si incroyables, toutes les copeaux froissés, les choses spontané, si travaillé de Franck Gehry. C'est à chaque fois quelque chose qui n'appartenait pas, messieurs, au champ de l'architecture. Donc, à chaque fois, il faut bien considérer que l'avenir n'appartient pas à l'autonomie disciplinaire de l'architecture telle qu'on nous la formule. Et que ce qu'on cherche bien, à chaque fois, c'est de se servir de tout ce qui est en notre possession. Il y a donc là une exploration du champ culturel le plus transversal. Et on va aller chercher des raisons d'architecture dans la philosophie, dans la poésie, dans la photographie, dans le cinéma, dans les arts plastiques, dans la rue, dans n'importe quelle rencontre, dans n'importe quelle vision du monde. Et si je crois que l'architecture bouge beaucoup actuellement dans la tête des jeunes architectes, c'est moins à cause des écoles qu'à cause de cette possibilité énorme qui nous est offerte avec le voyage. Ça a toujours été un moyen d'enseigner l'architecture, le voyage. Il y avait le voyage à Rome, le voyage en Grèce, le voyage en Égypte. Bon. Aujourd'hui, c'est beaucoup plus que ça. Et il s'agit effectivement, à chaque fois, de regarder ce qui peut devenir le point de départ d'une émotion, l'architecture correspondant à amplifier cette émotion et à la faire partager par d'autres. Donc on est toujours là, on est des prédateurs, des capteurs, en fait, des voleurs. On pique comme ça au passage ce qui passe. Et à un moment on se dit, tiens, ça fera bien du sens et du sensible à un moment. Ou on ne peut pas le coller comme ça à n'importe quel moment. Mais on sait qu'on a engrangé ça. Parce qu'on est toujours des voyeurs, on est toujours en train de se demander qu'est-ce que je pourrais bien introduire dans le champ de l'architecture. Qu'est-ce qui va devenir architecture demain? Non, décidément, l'avenir de l'architecture, c'est sûr, aujourd'hui encore, n'est pas architectural, ou n'est plus architectural.
Very interesting. Lord Foster, you have described architecture as marriage of art and technology. But you also said technology is just a tool, a means to an end, and you described the end as social. What are the challenges facing this marriage in the 21st century?
The future of humanity is the city. The process of urbanization, particularly in emerging economies, is moving at an accelerating pace. And if you take the city, it's as much about infrastructure as it is about individual buildings. So if I picked up the theme of Jean's quotation that the future of architecture is not architecture, it's about the holistic relationship between infrastructure and architecture, or infrastructure and buildings. Not necessarily the same thing. We hope that the buildings transcend and become architecture, so they really do more than just shelter. But if you think of any place that you visit, your memory of it, the quality of your life in a place is more determined by the infrastructure. In other words, your experience of how you move through a city, the public spaces, the streets, the squares, the public transport, the gateways, the ports, your arrival, your departure. It's more than just the experience of an individual building. And it is the interaction between the infrastructure and the individual building that determines the quality of your life. And it is also linked directly to survival, because if you're in a world where more and more people want access to energy and to power, because through access to power is freedom, emancipation, sexual freedom, education, infant mortality, life expectancy, and power. More and more people want it because 1/3 of the world lives in slums, doesn't have power, doesn't have water, doesn't have sanitation. So in our world, half the energy is consumed by buildings and half the energy is concerned by the movement of people and goods between buildings. So our environment, our built environment, consumes 3/4 of the energy that we produce. So it's not just about the quality of life, it's about survival. So that's why I would agree with Jean. The future of humanity is not architecture. The future of humanity is the city. It's the fusion between the individual buildings and all the connections between them.
Frank, would you agree?
So, if our buildings are such a great amount of our time and energy, the construction industry acknowledges that 30% or more is waste. Waste, pure waste. And if you talk about sustainability, that's a big number. So we have to understand what that is and how to get rid of it. The other part of it is, if you look around the Western cities and you look at the cities in this region, they're not too dissimilar. The city centers, you got towers and traffic, and if this culture is so different, why is it similar? I think it's kind of inevitable. We've got industry, we've got technology, and it's easier to repeat it. And you often bring in developers and people from the Western world who repeat what they know because it's profitable and they understand it. So I think really what your first question about the feelings is what I'm interested in. And what I'm interested in is this, in the Guggenheim, is the potential it has because of the art that's going to be shown here and the mandate from the leadership to collect artists from all over this region, artists from all over the world, and talk to each other through the arts. And I think that, for me, is the hope of the future. I'm sure, I mean, when I watch the Divan Orchestra, Barenboims, with the Israelis and Palestinians playing Mozart together and talking to each other as friends until they put down their instruments and walk out, and then they're back at it. But there is a moment where they get together, and I think the arts can bring that together, and I think that world has a closer touch with your feelings and your truth. Art has a truth to it that's impossible to refute. And I'm looking to that for your future and for our future.
I was going to say that the Art Abu Dhabi is fascinating in terms of, for example, some years ago, I remember visiting Arco in Spain, which is an art fair, and discovering a whole new range of artists because of the emphasis on the Spanish-speaking world. So it wasn't just Spain, it was also South America. And the whole fascinating thing about Art Abu Dhabi is the way in which it seems to bring forth a whole, for me, new range of artists from the wider region. And extraordinary talent. I mean, just walking around today and being immersed in it, I thought it was fantastic and very revealing.
I think, Frank, you talked about wanting to discuss feeling when it comes to the future. So my question to you, there's always an element of the unknown to what you do. it appears that
I
often...
think for all of us.
True. And I think that there appears to be that you're pushing, all of you do that, you're pushing the boundaries all the time and to the limits. So for me, it's interesting to know when you're designing a building, how do you pull back yourself, or how do you pull back the hunger, the feelings?
I don't.
We're not going to change the Guggenheim building.
I mean, this is a love affair, finally, and it's I'm very passionate about my work. I like to make places where people feel good, where they get excited, where it motivates them, where they feel love for the. That's what's missing in this cold, lifeless world. It's the lack of passion, the lack of feeling, no love. That's what we're trying to do.
I think in a way that the scan of projects that we saw just before you introduced the conversation between us, the outcome of the creative process is different in each case. But I think that the common denominator, the unifying factor, is that passion. It's a love of what you do. It's a consuming interest and a belief in an optimistic future. You have to be an optimist to be an architect. I mean, the barriers that are erected in terms of creating any building, the number of parties that have to be satisfied. You also have to be a very good listener, because that is part of the process. But you also have to have the courage of conviction, without being so far in that direction that it becomes arrogant. So it's a mixture of humility and having to have the confidence to create places that you hope will make people feel better, will improve the quality of their life.
Very interesting. I guess where I was trying to go with this question is, does the tools available for you today, the limits of technology, construction, does it limit your creativity? Is there a building on your mind or an idea, given the limits of the boundaries around us, that you never were able to conceive or implement?
The limits are our limits. When I started, I can't turn on the computer, although I have a computer company. And it does amazing things, and I rely on it. But if my kids don't turn on the television for me, I don't know how to turn it on. So the limitation is, I mean, I would go back to the T-square and slide rule, but I think the toys and tools are amazing. And you know, our partner Dassault built airplane 777 paperless. That's inevitable for architecture. It's once the cat's out of the bag, we're gonna have to do it, and we're looking to do it. And I think we're gonna have to learn to use those tools. I think somebody's gonna learn to design on the computer like Leonardo da Vinci could draw. You know, there's eventually somebody's got to do it.
But I think it's interesting. I think you need all the tools. I mean, I'm fascinated the way that now you can do computer simulations in terms of the microclimate of an individual building and the microclimate of outdoor spaces. What is interesting is that if I think of the work that I do in Silicon Valley, which is the home of the most advanced digital world, those presentations are totally analog. And in parallel with investment in computers, I'm also seeing massive investment in physical models. And it's interesting that the more sophisticated the world becomes in terms of its digital technology, its sheer computing power, also, in parallel, the importance of the physical model is more and more important. And the interesting thing is that the technology is now so advanced in terms of video conferencing and so on. We don't need to come together. It's taken 3 years to get the three of us together. And here we all are in the same space. I mean, it's like the paperless office. Or we don't need physical models because the computer is better.
But the thing is to transfer, I always think of it this way, the ideas are, I think of them as dream ideas. They're not really, but they're notions, fascinating, whatever. And translating them from there through the process to the finished building. So when the building is finished, it has those feelings. That's where it gets lost, a lot of it, because there's hundreds of hands touch these buildings, and you got to think of it. I never trust the models. I always build 2 or 3 just to keep me out of falling in love with the model, just keeping my eye on the finale, so that by the time it gets to the end, all the love and feeling is there, not in the model.
No, I was just going to say the other thing, of course, is that none of us can tell anybody what to do. We're as powerful as our advocacy. In other words, we're totally dependent on our powers of advocating. We can't even go on a building site and say, change that. Which is interesting.
John, you have all the tools you need?
I think... Je parle anglais, ça va pas, non. Je crois que pour nous dépasser, c'est pas uniquement une question d'outils, c'est une question de situation. Et je crois que Abu Dhabi est un exemple extraordinaire de ça. C'est-à-dire que Abu Dhabi est dans son âge d'or et on a envie et on veut être à la hauteur de cette ambition. Et c'est cette ambition qui nous habite et qui nous oblige à aller beaucoup plus haut, beaucoup plus loin. Et pour moi, j'ai toujours dit que le meilleur outil pour moi, c'était un lit, parce que c'est encore là que je pense le mieux, et c'est mon outil le plus utile, finalement. Mais je ne crache pas sur les ordinateurs, je crois. Mais je crois surtout à cette situation-là. Je crois que c'est comme les athlètes, quand les Jeux Olympiques sont là, ils sont là. Mais toutes les grandes villes du monde, à certains moments, au moment de leur âge d'or, ont créé, avec des moyens économiques que les autres villes n'avaient pas, pour rendre compte de cet âge d'or. Abu Dhabi, c'est exactement ça, et je suis très fier de participer à cette matérialisation de l'âge d'or. Mais ça, ce sont des situations qui nous obligent à nous transcender, à sauter plus haut, autrement, et à faire une chose que le monde entier va regarder, puisque c'est là que les choses se passent, c'est là qu'elles se cristallisent, c'est là que l'époque se cristallise. Il y a des endroits où l'époque se cristallise par l'architecture avec des moyens exceptionnels. L'architecture, ce n'est pas que ça. Elle s'exprime aussi en Afrique actuellement, dans les plus petits villages. Je n'ai pas dit le contraire. Mais cette cristallisation, à un moment, d'une ambition exceptionnelle, avec des moyens exceptionnels, qui produisent les monuments d'une époque et qui marquent l'époque, c'est aussi l'un des exercices qui nous amène le plus à nous dépasser.
Well, we need to move to our last subject, which is social change. And I'll start with you, John. You know, when we're talking about social change, do you think architecture generates contemporary culture? or is it a reflection of the culture? Does it lead, or is it a reflection?
C'est une interactivité quand même. Hein. C'est l'histoire de la poule et de l'œuf. C'est-à-dire que l'architecture est évidemment le résultat d'un état culturel. Et en même temps, l'acte architectural va devenir une part du passé et va devenir donc une part de cette culture partagée. Donc il faut considérer l'architecture comme un accélérateur de culture, si on peut. Il faut considérer aussi que l'architecture est un acte culturel qui est totalement en complémentarité avec d'autres sauts créatifs, d'autres modernités qui ont été inventées avant et qui représentent la même attitude finalement. Donc nous sommes bien dans un processus culturel vivant, on en fait partie totalement, on n'est pas le résultat uniquement de quelque chose, on participe de la vie culturelle, on fait partager des émotions, on fait comprendre un certain nombre de choses, on montre ce qui n'a jamais été montré, on pose des questions. Nous sommes vivants.
Frank, just on the same subject, it would be great to get your thoughts. And also, would you say architecture is an expression of what is already here within the culture? Or is it also leads you and point the way for the culture? Can it actually show the way?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think that it definitely, that's what we must do. That's the legacy you talked about before. That it's important that all of us sign on to that, showing how we lived, what's important, what we've learned from the past, and what we've learned from the world cultures, and how we interpret that individually. It's a democratic ideal that there's a lot of different voices. He's different, I'm different. That we can express those differences and fit into a mosaic of a new place like this, and hopefully add to your to the life here. In our case, the building is, as I said before, is about linking contemporary art that is globalized, that Picasso learned from Africa. African art today is learning from Picasso. China, a lot of the new art has influences from Western art. You see, strangely enough, Andy Warhol and some of the new work, reinterpreted, inspired by. I think that's our job, that's our mission. We hope, ideally, we inspire people to do even greater things.
Do you see that process happening? I mean, how do you deal with resistance, I guess, when you're showing the way or showing something different? How do you deal with resistance or people stuck to their old ways without being perceived as intruding, not showing the way, more intruding?
For me anyway, it's by interacting with the people, including them, and doing a building without a client would be the most difficult thing. You'd have to face yourself. I'm building a house and I have my son designing it because I can't possibly design a house for myself. I think it's the interaction with the intelligent partners, well-educated, well-intentioned, well-meaning, who have a dream and want to see it realized. And I think that's a rocket ship for me.
Talking about houses, is your house in Santa Monica finished?
The house I live in is finished, but I have an
Few
idea
ideas.
to build a new one. I'm very young. I'm 83, going to be 84. And I should be moving into one of those towers with services, and I've decided to go the other way.
That's great. That's great. Lord Foster, do you want to maybe talk about the same subject?
I
same
think
question?
that it's important to be stretching the boundaries. So architecture should be also about developing potential. If you take a medical research building, you can say that it's about wonderfully serviced laboratories with very complex, very demanding environmental conditions, but you'd be totally missing the point, because if you talk to any scientists or you look at the history of medical breakthroughs, innovation, it's always grown out of the informal spaces. It's grown out of the social exchange between people from different disciplines and specialities, the chance encounter. So in that sense, the social dimension in the most scientifically poised projects is even more critical. So that social agenda and your question about, is the building leading the way and transforming social patterns, or is it reflecting the past? It has to be about projecting into the future, and it has to be about breaking down barriers, whether those are social barriers, whether they're barriers between different specialities. It's the essence of humanity.
Very interesting. I'm conscious of time, and also want to open it for a Q&A. Now, we did ask a lot of the audience. I know most of the people here, and we got a lot of questions, as I said in the beginning. And what we're trying to do is, within the time frame, to touch on some of the questions. It's a long list that I have. So to the audience, I would like to apologize if your question doesn't get asked today. And if I want to move to the first question is for Lord Foster. Someone asked a question on when he said, when I was taking the escalator inside Canary Wharf, I felt like I'm inside a machine. Was that your intention?
I have no recollection of...
Because apparently, I think he's alluding that building is designed by you. And
Which one?
Canary Wharf, the escalators, and
Maybe that's talking about Canary Wharf Station,
yeah,
which is a transportation interchange.
that's right.
And really is a kind of stealth building, because although it's a vast chamber and is handling larger crowds in terms of throughput than Heathrow Airport, it's really a park on the surface. So yes, the experience of moving through space is the escalator, which delivers you to that great chamber below ground, which is almost in its proportions like a cathedral. So yes, I think that the transport through space, which again was heralded in the world of art as early as 1913 with Boccioni defining a figure in space. And I find it fascinating the way that artists can anticipate trends, often decades before they happen. I mean,
another question, Lord Foster, on your apparently you're designing for Apple, and you had a relation with the late Steve Jobs. And question is, do you think dealing with Steve Jobs and now dealing with the new management, do you think creativity stops with the person, or Apple stays creative? And I think that they're trying to relate this to you guys too. Does the creativity stop after a person, or the institutional continues to be creative? And it's a common question.
Yeah, I think
More on Apple.
I think we all put things in motion, and they continue even after we're gone, somehow. Now, they may knock them down. I've had a few buildings torn down. Which is, I don't know if you've experienced that.
yes, 2 or 3 have gone, yes.
So I think as the world changes, hopefully some of our work is timeless. You hope that it is. But we're limited. We're building in our time.
I guess
It's different, yes. I mean, if you start a project as I did, and for nearly 4 years with Steve, but that project continues. The creative drive continues in a different way with different individuals. But there is a continuum, yes, because I think in the best groupings and teams, there is a very strong collective endeavor, and I think that individuals do make imprints, and although it's different, there are continuities, because there is if the sense of values, if the philosophy which permeates a group, a large team, an organization, however you define it, then that has a momentum.
very interesting. I guess this question on Apple must be coming from someone who's in the investment field and thinking, should they buy Apple after Steve Jobs? So I think the answer is yes, if you're a buyer. Creativity with Apple continues. We should pay for that
You
advice.
bet.
Very expensive advice. If you know, there is a question, John, on poetry again, but the question is twisted toward: does the architect shares with the word? What does the architecture shares with the word of rhythm and rhyme? I think the question is do you feel that poetry and architecture are in conflict, or are they in rhythm? And is it more musical, or is it more structured? And I guess it's
Je crois
freedom to
que
answer.
l'architecture, de plus en plus, elle va être partout, à toutes les échelles. Et nous sommes dans une époque à la fois de micro-architecture, d'interférences complètes, et donc probablement de poésie à tous les niveaux. Je crois qu'on entre vraiment dans une époque de transformation, et cette transformation, c'est la caractéristique même du XXIe siècle aujourd'hui. Tous les architectes vont travailler sur ces sites qui ont été construits souvent trop vite, vont transformer des bâtiments qui sont trop souvent les mêmes, qui sont trop souvent clonés depuis longtemps. Et je crois qu'effectivement la poésie nous sera d'une grande utilité, mais aussi tout ce qui est de l'ordre de l'immatériel, et en particulier cette fameuse lumière qui révèle les choses. Je crois que c'est une question fondamentale, puisqu'on va sortir de la création ex nihilo pour entrer dans la création avec tout ce qu'on a sous la main. Dans des choses les plus éphémères, les plus fragiles, les plus... et je crois toujours à ces notions très très sensitives qui sont liées à de pures émotions et à la relation avec le temps et la lumière. C'est pour ça que je cite toujours cette phrase de Valérie, le temps scintille et le songe est savoir. On va aller de dérive en dérive, et ce sont ces dérives-là qui peut-être nous mèneront le plus loin.
Well, we had to reach to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very clear speaking today to these great minds that architects do not build for today. They build for tomorrow, hopefully a better tomorrow. They create buildings with a legacy, meant for current and the future generation. There is an old saying that goes, the essence of a vision is to look at the grains of sand and to see palaces. Our panelists today have shown tremendous vision, demonstrated by their participation in the Saadiyat story. Despite their very different journeys, they have managed to meet here in Saadiyat, here in Abu Dhabi. Lord Foster, Frank Gehry, John Neville, thank you so much.